So with me is political commentator Sanjay Jha. Sanjay Jha is in a very interesting spot where he is not following any party line, and that gives us an advantage. It helps us to ask questions which a person with a political party affiliation would hesitate to answer. And today we ask some very interesting questions. I hope the viewers will like these questions. Sanjay ji, one of the conflicts India faces in business and economy is that when we try to build a business like Facebook or Tesla, we have to spend every penny of funding raised on the innovation. We can't afford to provide any substantial kickbacks to political parties who are generally used to sanctioning a business based on a kickback, of course, in one way or the other. So how, going forward, if India wants to create these kind of companies and dominate the world scenario, what should India do?
I've had problems with the Congress, but I still follow the party line of the Congress because I think the Congress stands for the idea of India. And my political differences or any personal adjustment problems apart, I do believe that the whole concept of a secular, progressive, liberal democracy is something that the Congress espouses, and if it were to carry it forward in a proper fashion, it will be good for the country. Now, your question is a very valid one. I do believe, let's not be unfair to the many manufacturing companies that have managed to, despite all the hurdles and obstacles, create an India story. So if you look at the Tatas, for example, if you look at the Birlas, you look at the historical Walchans, for example, they all ushered in industry at a time when India was just kind of recovering from the blows of the partition. Crony capitalism actually has come bigger into play post liberalization because India saw economic growth, and suddenly the value of your natural assets like land, water, spectrum, and various other government assets became very, very critical. And coal being another natural resource, and we all know how these are very controversial subjects. The government, in a pressure to liberalize, did not have a historical base for allocating them. So a lot of the learning happened through trial and error. To give you one example, if you look at the 2G issue, the government's job is not to maximize revenue alone. Its principal job was to make telecom cheap and easily available to the common citizens of India. And you all know that mobile revolution has really empowered the underprivileged sections of Indians. So I do believe that that was revolutionary. But because the laws were opaque, they may even have been corruption. At the end of the day, the country had to battle its way out of sorting out the whole problem of what kind of an economic growth model do you want, which is also not linked to a kickback and what you call as a rent-seeking culture. So the short answer to you will be, if you look at the current Gautam Adani issue that has now become a global talking point, that is extremely brazen because I think India has gone through the trial and error period of spectrum, of coal, where all political parties did not know what to do. And therefore, the current crisis is one where the government has probably chosen to, in a very blatant fashion, favor a particular industrialist. What can India still create, new great companies like a Tesla? Or, for example, as you mentioned, the Googles of the world. Please remember that even these companies benefited a lot from what the US government did for them through the US government R&D. So I think the fundamental point is, yes, we are creating unicorns, we are creating new manufacturing, good kind of stories in pharmaceuticals. And I think there still exists a great deal of scope for India to do well maybe in green and clean energy, and possibly going forward indefinitely, not beyond just the technology and the software, hopefully in the area of hardcore manufacturing and maybe semiconductors and chips. It's a long story to play forward, but the short answer to you, and I know I've taken a little longer than I wanted to, is that in India we have lowered our bar of our politicians. The politicians are corrupt, we are okay. Politicians give you a speech and we are like clapping and very impressed. Politician tells you, no, we are a great democracy, and we buy it. There is something completely, shall we say, illogical, irrational, and frankly hard to fathom in the way we buy into what the politicians say. I think civil society and the common citizens of India need to ask harder and tougher questions.
So the next question I want to ask is, see, what do politicians care about morality and corruption? The reason they go after an industrialist more often than not is because the industrialist has acquired a fan following and he has become a publicly known figure. Some people, a group of people appreciate him, whether it is Sahara, whether it is Vijay Mallya, Lalit Modi, Nirav Modi. They have all been people who have been like, who have a fan following. So, do you think that politicians really attack them because a job of a politician is to have a hold on people's minds, and they are taking a piece of that pie?
Well, look at the India story, Tarun. 1% of India owns 40% of his wealth. The biggest problem that India is going to face as an economy is going to be inequality. And I believe that this government in particular is perpetuating a culture of cronyism in a pretty brazen fashion. Let me just call it that. We are talking about one industrialist because now he's become a poster boy of crony capitalism, Gautam Adani. But I think there are many others like him. But, I want to salute the spirit of the real Indian entrepreneur, not just in software and biotech and many other new industries. But I think India is beyond just an Adani or a Tata. It's the MSMEs that really are the backbone of the Indian economy. That's where jobs are really created. Secondly, I think I completely agree with you. It's shocking, isn't it, that you have an electoral bond scheme where, as a businessman or as an individual, I can fund you if you're a political party, and you're not obliged to tell the people of India, "Mujhe ye paise deta kaun hai?" Is there a quid pro quo? And I think it's just kind of a hijacking of morality in India. I think this could be probably the biggest bottleneck to the India story playing out. We are so happy with we are the fastest growing economy in the world, which the government sells, but nobody tells you that the base is so low, or that now even Saudi Arabia has become the fastest growing economy. You're not. I mean, end of day, people will talk about we are the fifth largest economy, bigger than Great Britain, but that is bound to happen, right? Because you're growing, you're a 140 crore people economy. The fundamental point is nobody says that in per capita income, which is a real, probably better reflection than the GDP of the real poverty in the country, you're at 145, or that 300 million people are below the poverty line. So I think the challenge in India is that because we have lost our ability to challenge the political ecosystem, we are not transparent anymore. The institutions are dead. The media doesn't ask these questions at all. I think you're going to find a more lopsided and a skewed situation where those who are close to the government will gain and those who are not will fall by the wayside. But ask yourself a question. One of the reasons why Indian economy has struggled since even before the pandemic till now is because rural demand has gone down. And if you don't have demand, where is your supply going to meet a target? Which is why you find private capital investment in India is abysmal. So I think the truth is that the more you start favoring your blue-eyed boys because you get some political kickback or some political funding, I think you are basically corrupting India's democracy at its core. And I think as a country today, forget all the bravado, mother of democracy and all this big, braggadocio that you hear on the TV channels. The truth is we have become weaker. We are today more fragile. And fundamentally, I believe that India is not just socially polarized. India is economically equally skewed. And that's a very toxic combination.
One of the precedents, you being from Congress, we can ask this question. You must have studied Gandhi a lot. Gandhi has also written in his text that when British government was making India poorer and poorer, the impression that the common man got was that we are progressing with rapid scale and speed. And that remains a problem always. I think that one cannot spin a story that is against the ruling establishment. So that is one note maybe you can address in the next question. Are there any examples of of a democracy turning into a dictatorship and thriving? Most people feel that a democracy leads to a lot of debates and slow decision making process, and a dictatorship can result in better growth. So, what would you say to that? Are there any precedents like that?
Well, I'll give you one example since you mentioned Mahatma Gandhi, and I'm a huge Gandhian in terms of the way I love his philosophy. Today's headline in the Indian Express talks about an attempt to obliterate history. They're trying to remove, the whole story behind Mahatma Gandhi's assassination, and I think that to me is a worrying manifestation of where we are headed as a country. So the people will be told a different story on Gandhi's assassination, and I think this is really where future generations will wake up to not even knowing the truth behind what prompted Nathuram Godse to assassinate the father of the nation. Clearly, this is a product of insecurity, right? This is a product of fear that we have a very ugly and a violent past and we want to somewhere conceal it. But I think your question regarding dictatorships and democracies, why is democracy, or what we can even call as a capitalist democracy, or a socialist mixed democracy, a better model than dictatorship? Because the people are stakeholders in the country's growth. And if you look at a dictatorship of any country, they have paid a huge price. Russia is a great example of that for you, right in front of your eyes. Look at the fact that today Russia is dismembered. Russia is fighting with Ukraine. I think the entire economy, these countries will take a long time to recover. Russia is even no longer considered part of the Cold War III, which is now emerging with China and the USA really calling the shots. In terms of, I would say, if you look at President Erdogan in Turkey, elected, these are all illiberal democracies. They have election, a man becomes a prime minister or president, and then he becomes a ruthless dictator. This is a new model, which is called as the elected autocracy or a democratically elected dictatorship. In India, we say it so often, right, that today everyone is under threat. There's a journalist, a businessman. I know people in business who don't even speak up, and they tell me, we are terrified of an income tax or a ED or a CBI raid. An NGO, activists, students, you name it, everyone. Let's not even talk of political opponents. So you have a situation today where the model is one where you have elections. So the aam janta is made to believe कि यार ये तो democracy, प्रजातंत्र बहुत मजबूत है, and then they have actually throttled everything, because democracy is not about two elections. It's about what happens between the elections. And most of these models have failed. So if you look at Turkey, serious issues. Look at Trump. He was an embarrassment in the way he handled the COVID. America, the worst casualty rates, the maximum fatalities. And this in the richest country of the world, which was aware of what was going on, which by the way had the vaccines first. Look at the example of Brazil, another election, again a big country, a BRICS country. Look what happened. Bolsonaro was thrown out. You look at Boris Johnson in the UK. Yeah, I mean, these are all examples of countries that have democracies in struggle. Look at Italy. None of them really could manage that well because the leadership was essentially very autocratic and intimidating. Look at China. For all their initial success story and zero kind of COVID infection, look at what they have had to go through. So you have situations today where it's hard to cite an example of any country that can really throttle its institutions, subdue the voice of the people, vanish or literally vanquish the opponents, and have it by a single leader rule. It doesn't work, because you see a political ecosystem to deliver on the economic output, or in terms of jobs, or in terms of industrial growth, basically prosperity, improving the lives of the common man, needs to have the focus on that. When a politician is obsessed about power, they can never really do justice to that success. And the best example before you is Pakistan. Pakistan and we became independent at the same time, right? One country chose the democratic model, and look where India went. Okay, although let's not take it for granted that this will continue. And look at what Pakistan did when it became, a religious theocracy, and it only went downwards.
So, you could have chosen the path of being an entrepreneur, making more and more money, and just aligning yourself with a political party and not be a political commentator or an active participant. What made you choose the path of, being a political commentator? What drives you to follow news every day, comment, and this path?
Well, how I entered politics is a whole happenstance sort of serendipity. I have written it in my book, The Great Unraveling India After 2014. I can't really get into details of that, but the big difference, Tarun, in the corporate world, what do you do? I mean, supposing I was a banker today, like I was once upon a time. Let's assume I was the head of corporate banking. What's my job? To target, very affluent corporates whom I can lend money to, who can pay my money back. I mean, how's that going to make a difference to the world, right? It's a safe business. Or I'm selling credit cards in a booming, economy. End of day, you're still talking about, certain income level, certain cities, or you're targeting in a very exclusive kind of a community. Uh, if I was with Unilever selling a soap or a shampoo, I'm still, playing around with a certain set of the population, which is my target group. But when you're in politics, and this is why I, frankly speaking, have loved it, is that you influence through a policy 140 crore people. I mean, let me give you an example: Manrega, RTI, Food Security Act. Well, they were all passed by the Congress, and I'm very proud of, being part of that party for a considerable time. I still am, although I happen to be suspended. Is these policies change the lives of people, of ordinary workers, of the unemployed, of the agriculture labor, of the marginal farmer. It gave food to people who were literally starving, right? Can you imagine the impact of that? It's phenomenal. I mean, think about it, that a prime minister or a government takes a decision on your border security. I mean, it's huge, right? The implications are, one, it teaches you responsibility. Second, it teaches you accountability. And third, politics teaches you the ability to inspire and change lives of millions of people. The tragedy with Indian politics in the last couple of years has been that it's become about not, responsibility, but about power. It's not become about accountability, but about my ability to dominate. It's not become about deliberation and dialogue, but about, my word is the last word. And I think that is the battle that India is currently in.
So, is it possible for somebody to enter politics like a career option? We have political supporters participating in a rally and stuff like that, and being a volunteer in the political party. But is it also possible to say, let's say, to ask somebody to pick up a career in politics? That okay, you can be in politics, you can be in corporate banking, or you can be in movies, you can be in media, and likewise you can be. So, is it possible that yes, you can just get in, make some money, make a livelihood, and is it possible?
Well, I wish it was. Unfortunately, the truth is that it could be a lot easier. I'm very happy to see a lot of people more engaged with politics thanks to social media and television, etc. I do see people now curious to know what's going on, which is a good thing. But a lot of people are still very nervous about making an entry into mainstream politics. Somebody like me entered in laterally. But then that was after years of experience. I do feel that if you're a genuine activist, this is a great platform to be in. It's a struggle. And I therefore recommend to a lot of people, try and be financially independent so that you're not, kind of compromising on your ideals or ideology because you are also waiting to earn your income from politics. My second point will be ideologically committed. I find it pathetic when people actually leave one party and join another. I mean, take an example. A lot of people asked me, when I had my problems with the Congress, which were more to do with an ideological and a political practice issue. Ideological was that we were not really standing up for secularism as we should, and political was that we were not being as aggressive as we should be to defeat the BJP. So I really don't call that a very seminal conflict. But For I think an ordinary person, the whole expectation that politics is about becoming rich and famous needs to be driven out of your mind. That is an unfortunate reality of India, but that's not the way politics is meant to be. So the ideal politics is what a Gandhi brought in, is about service. Gandhi never wanted to be a president or a prime minister, right? And he is still the biggest influence in politics worldwide. So you don't need a position of power, but you need to have that passion within you and the perseverance to say that, listen, when I enjoy being with people, I want to make a real impact there. How can I influence and maybe make a difference? Now, making a difference is a cliche, very tough to do, and you need a commitment for it. So I think if you're driven, even if you're on the corporate side, you can participate in politics in a part-time basis. You can be a campaigner, you can be a copywriter, you can be a manifesto creator, you can actually help the party raise funds, you can be a thought leader in foreign policy. There are many areas opening up, and I do believe that politicians know that they need knowledge, knowledge is eventually power, and it's not just about information. So I think this is a great time for young people with enterprise who want a long term haul, and even those who aspire to be ministers and prime ministers and chief ministers. Why not? It's a tough one, simply because Indian politics is still got a family influence. It still has favoritism. There is still a lot of criminal nexus. I mean, we all know that if 42% of leaders in Mr. Modi's cabinet have a criminal track record. I mean, it can't be worse than that. Look at the number of MPs with serious charges who continue to be elected and re-elected. So Indian politics is far from perfect. We are a work in progress. We are a democracy of sorts. But trust me, there's hard work ahead.
भाई एक बात ये भी है कि अगर कोई पॉलिटिक्स ज्वाइन करता है तो उसके मन में ये रहेगा कि अरे यार 42% पॉलिटिशियंस यहाँ पे तो मतलब क्रिमिनल चार्जेस वाले हैं, कभी गोली कोई लग गई तो
देखिए, ये दुर्भाग्यपूर्ण है, खेदजनक है, लेकिन देखिए हकीकत का सामना भी करना पड़ेगा आपको। मैं ये भी जानता हूँ कि ढेर सारे लोग राजनीति में हैं, अच्छे लोग हैं, जिनका उद्देश्य सही है, जिनका विचारधारा उसके साथ वो खड़े रहते हैं, और वो अपने सिद्धांत के साथ, अपने आदर्श के साथ कभी समझौता नहीं करेंगे। लेकिन ये बात भी सच है, और इसको हम नज़रअंदाज नहीं कर सकते कि कठिनाइयाँ हैं, भ्रष्ट लोग भी हैं, सांप्रदायिक लोग भी हैं, और तानाशाही लोग भी हैं। और इसी अफसाने को लेते हुए हमें एक सुनहरा भारत बनाना है। तो ये एक तरीके से जो महाभारत में एक तरीके से महाभारत एक विचारधारा का एक टक्कर है, और मैं समझता हूँ कि भारत एक महान देश है, और भारत के जो आवाम है, 140 करोड़ लोग हैं, वो भावुक लोग हैं। आप उनको थोड़े वक्त के लिए गुमराह कर सकते हैं, हो सकता है कुछ सालों के लिए भी उनको आप भटका सकते हैं, लेकिन सच्चाई अंत में हमेशा जीत होती है सच्चाई की। और वो जो कहावत है ना, यू कैन फूल सम ऑफ द पीपल ऑल द टाइम, यू कैन फूल ऑल द पीपल सम ऑफ द टाइम, but you can't fool all the people all of the time. Thank you, Tarun.
And just one last question is that we talked about your book, and we are sitting behind a backdrop of books. What are the 2 books you hold very close to you, the ones which you keep reading once in a while?
Well, to be very frank with you, as a student, when I was in school, I was a big fan of literature, English literature. So one of my favorites was Charles Dickens' Great Expectations, and I can read the last few pages of the book 100 times over. It's a masterpiece in writing, and it also depicted the challenges of society at the time, the poverty and the income equality and the class inequality. I thought it was exceptional prose. There are many books that I read. The other one, which has been a huge favorite of mine, which I believe is a piece of art again, has been Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children. Because once again, it carried the story of India and of a boy born at the midnight hour of 1947, and asked questions of the emergency years when he's in his 30s. And this is very interesting that the emergency was a wrong decision, an aberration, and Mrs. Gandhi lost the elections thereafter. 3 years later, the same people voted her back with 353 seats. But, as Salman Rushdie wrote later, he said, here was my book, which was so critical of Mrs. Gandhi and the emergency. But when Mrs. Gandhi won won the elections and she was there when the book was released, she had no objection to the book being published or being promoted or being sold as a bestseller. Her only objection was to a line which Salman Rushdie wrote where he commented on some aspect of her thoughts, which was, subjective, personal, and clearly could not be substantiated. And he said, I really kind of was appalled that, or rather aghast, that would be a more appropriate word, that she had no objection to me criticizing her for democracy and authoritarianism. And she let it go. So I think at the end of the day, I have really enjoyed books which are about society, which are about, people eventually. Like one of my other favorites is The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini, which is a book about how, end of day, people have battled, and made lives in a very fractured Afghanistan. And needless to mention, The Discovery of India by Jawaharlal Nehru, My Experiments with Truth by Mahatma Gandhi. And I just feel that, the more the younger generation reads and keeps away from the WhatsApp university, we'll have a great country. Thank you.
And you can just plug in your book.
Well, I don't want to plug it in, but I wrote The Great Unraveling, India After 2014, and my biggest kick was that Nobel laureate Dr. Amartya Sen, no less, endorsed the book and said, I'm glad Sanjay has written a book asking for a radical progressive politics in India. I hope people in India listen to him. Clearly they haven't. And I have another book coming up. This is a non-political book. It's a book on a slice of life. It's a non-fiction. It's got the most intriguing protagonist. But this is a book about love and loss. It's a book about regret and redemption. It's a book about something that Tarun, all of us as human beings go through. Whether you're a politician, whether you're a Tarun Agarwal, whether you are a Virat Kohli or a Shah Rukh Khan, or whether you're a farmer or anybody, we all go through loss and we all cope or have to cope with grief. This is a book about loss, and it's based on a personal experience. And strangely, I'm glad you're asking me, it releases hopefully on May 1st or May 2nd. And I hope to be able to give you a link to the book on Amazon. Its pre-orders will happen perhaps in another 10 days' time. So I'm excited to share this book with you.
So thanks a lot, Sanjay ji, for taking your time out and sharing your knowledge